Please welcome Nick Elliott, Head of Communities at Dow Jones Risk and Research, and our next panel of speakers.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. We're here to discuss navigating artificial intelligence, as the sign says. But most companies are still at the experimentation stage, trying out pilots and proofs of concept and that kind of thing. So we're really fortunate to have three panelists at companies that are well along on their AI journey. They've been using AI since before we even had the concept of ChatGPT, and we all knew the name of Sam Altman. On the far end is Beth Essig from Mount Sinai Health System. In the middle, Rob Beard from Mastercard. And on my immediate left, Shannon Klinger from Moderna. So I'd like to start with the three of you, and thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to start by just having a quick run through of how your companies are using AI. And Beth, perhaps we could start with you. I know you've got some really interesting use cases within the hospital system.
Well, I'm a general counsel of a health system that includes a large medical school and also 8 hospitals. And we've been using AI for a long time, and we think we're really leaders in it. And I'm going to tell you some of the uses that we use AI, and you'll see that you've benefited from it already. We use AI for diagnosis and treatment of patients. We actually use AI for predictive analytics. We can tell which patients in our hospital are likely to have malnutrition and certain needs like that, just using different indicators in the medical record. And this is just running medical records every day through an AI tool that we developed at our health system that just won an award from Stanford University. We use it for telehealth, and you can speak to the right person with telehealth needs because a patient can give certain information. Is this working? Because there's terrible feedback.
Can you hear
I'm sorry.
Beth okay?
Okay.
Okay, carry on.
No, that's okay. So telehealth, drug development, drug uses, and then in the medical school, we're developing ways to use genetic information to predict future health issues that can be addressed now. If you have an appointment at Mount Sinai Health System, the first page that comes up, you're asked if you're willing to participate in a study where you would donate your genetic information. It will be used anonymously, and it's used we call it Mount Sinai Million, and it's used to develop genetic cures and identification of different diseases. And that's just on the clinical side, and there's much, much more. And the more people use it, the more enthusiastic people are. I will not talk about all the regulations we have to deal with that address these issues now that are rolling out. We also use it on the administrative side. So they write your doctors when you go into a doctor's office now. He can talk to you, and an AI record is prepared. The record writes itself based on the conversation between the doctor and the patient because it knows what a medical record should look like based on that conversation. And of course, the doctors are supposed to review the medical record and make sure it's acceptable, but it's an incredibly efficient tool because what it means is the doctor isn't standing at the computer doing that when he should be looking and talking to his patient. And my favorite use is, I don't know, does anybody here represent a payer, a managed care company? So,
Payers, anybody?
uh-oh. Okay, we use it.
You like them. You don't
Okay,
wanna
that's
offend
okay.
anybody.
We know that they use it to deny claims that are, we think, legitimate, and we're using it back now to write really excellent appeals. And yes, thank you. We use it to search medical records, help us find the data that we need to convince the payer, and to provide a background so that we can fight and win. So that's just some of the uses. I could do 7 more, but I think I've done enough.
Well, let's hear from Rob. Rob, I think AI is core to your anti-fraud efforts, isn't it?
For sure. And first I want to say how hard it is to follow Danny on a panel. Geez, gosh. I don't know how I ended up following him. I should be in front of him next time. So Really great to be here, and it's a great discussion with truly, I think, some of the best people in the space and the most forward-thinking. And I'd like to think that's what Mastercard is as well in terms of the use of AI. We've been using AI for decades, and you mentioned fraud. We've certainly used AI to enhance our network, to keep it safer. But it's not just about keeping a network safe. That's very core, but it's also reducing the friction in keeping the network safe. And that's really a big and important thing for us, because you can do a lot of things to block transactions from happening, right? You can do a lot of things to prevent them from happening under certain use cases. But what's really interesting and challenging is how can you decipher between the transactions that are safe and the transactions that aren't safe without having to put friction in the system. And that's a really cool use case for AI.
So it speeds up the transactions and it's a better experience for the card user.
Absolutely. And not just beyond cards, but all forms of payment and all different sort of stages of the payments transactions. It's a really, really interesting opportunity. And yeah, as you mentioned, it's enhancing experience beyond the safety, which is really cool. In addition to that, we use AI to prevent cyber attacks. For us, obviously, we process a lot of information, a lot of transactions come across our network and our systems, and so that system itself can be vulnerable. It's a target-rich environment, and it's important for us to be able to keep that target-rich environment safe. We've been using AI for decades to identify threat actors and the things that they might be able to do, and to be able to stay ahead of those threat actors. So that's another area. Beyond those two obvious ones, I want to mention something that I think is also critically important, and I am a huge proponent of AI, and I think, as general counsels, we tend to think about sort of the parade of horribles that come from potential AI use and what bad thing could happen. I like to really think about what rad things could happen, and one of the things that we think about at Mastercard is how can we use AI for good? And in our space, like around financial transactions, how can we use AI to, for example, help our customers make fairer credit decisions? How can we use AI to identify biases in the system and wring them out? How can we use AI to help people make better decisions on financial transactions? Those are things that aren't like core to our business and aren't going to increase the velocity of a payment transaction. But it's an illustration of ways that AI can power an economy that is fairer and more inclusive than what we have today.
Shannon, Moderna, I think, started out as an AI-based company, didn't it? So tell us about some of the use cases that you have.
Sure. Well, first of all, I love the use of AI for good. So I'm going to pick up on that as we go through this panel, because I think that's something we should all be thinking about. Is beyond operations, behind how you run your business. There is so much positive potential if we harness it in the right way to actually transform our world. For us, that's what we do, right? Many of you didn't know this company called Moderna in 2019. I suspect if I did a show of hands, there's not a person in this room who doesn't know about Moderna and messenger RNA. It is essentially the software of life. It is a technology platform that just happens to use protein design to trigger immune responses to treat a variety of diseases, most notably COVID-19. So from the inception of this company, we've been using AI for drug development, not in lieu of our amazing human scientists and researchers, but to aid those scientists and researchers in narrowing the playing field, becoming more specific about exactly how do you want to engineer those proteins. It was mentioned on the earlier panel, the last two Nobel Prizes that were awarded this week touch on this science and this aspect in terms of it being here to stay. But what we've done is, if you think about a company that was a research-only company into the middle of 2020, we've also had to scale and build quite quickly to be the commercial presence that we are now in 17 countries and still continuing to expand, and to have global distribution. We have built AI and digital first, which is actually a much easier way to do it than going into large established organizations and having to explain what am I taking away, what efficiencies am I deriving, what impact are we having on headcount. So whether we talk about research, where we've leaned in, whether we talk about development, so how we use AI to make sure we find diverse clinical trial participants, because we're so committed to making sure our clinical trials, the populations look like the patients that we treat, and that's core and fundamental to who we are. Whether that's real-time, just-in-time supply chain, so how do we use AI across our supply chain to know which retail pharmacy in which point needs our vaccine in that moment to cut wastage out of the supply chain and to be even more to supply our customers, whether it's understanding from a commercial perspective, how we think about marketing and market segmentation, how we think about disinformation. So there is a little bit of disinformation out there when it comes to the COVID-19 vaccines that keeps people 65 and older who may need to legitimately consider whether they get vaccinated for public health good from doing that. So how can we leverage AI to crawl across what we're all reading and seeing to help then make interventions to just say, let's make sure you have the facts. It's 100% a personal decision, but make the facts and the decision for your health and not because of something that you might have read somewhere else. And then broadly, and I hope we talk a bit more about this in operations, everything that we're doing is AI enabled in all of the functions, particularly we're really leaning in G&A, legal, everything we do now is AI enabled, and we're allowing ourselves to come up the curve and be so much more efficient because of how we're marrying the blend of our internal use of technology with an enterprise instance of what OpenAI has so that we have confidentiality with what our outside counsel is doing. It's just been amazing.
So I want to talk a little more about the journey and how you have gone about balancing innovation and risk here. And Beth, you've also been using AI for a long time, and you ran through some of the use cases. What are some of the things that happened along the way where you made decisions about balancing that embrace of AI with the risks that you might have identified?
I'd like to follow up on one of the earlier presenters who talked about the concern about the data that you share ending up used by your counterparty in various AI tools. That's a really deep concern in healthcare because a lot of the information people get is patient care information, and even if it's de-identified, we have a lot of ethical and other concerns. Interestingly, one of the things this has caused is now lawyers review almost every agreement. You would maybe not be surprised, I don't know what companies you represent, but you want to buy a copier machine, and the copier machine is connected to a data network, and patient care data can be sucked out of that information, and we see that everywhere. So one of the things that we're doing, and I'd love to talk to people afterwards, is trying to use AI for contract review more. We talked a little about this before, but we need to review every contract now to make sure there isn't some sneaky way that our data is being kept by the counterparty. And I'm sure that's issues that you have confronted. There's also increasing regulation, and the regulations I'm dealing with were not discussed in the last call, but we have HIPAA, patient privacy regulations. Very onerous, and we have to be very careful as we consider how to use them. Also, there's a new law in the Affordable Care Act, Section 257 of the Affordable Care Act. It talks about equity and diversity in healthcare and to ensure that healthcare is delivered in a fair and equitable way. And there are regulations that are going into effect in just a few months that require that any AI tool that's used for, you obviously are struggling with that as well, any AI tool that's used in care delivery or care decision making doesn't have an inappropriate, disproportionate impact on various issues. That is an enormous undertaking. We don't even know what devices and tools we use have AI components. It's very hard to assess and figure that out.
And that's because you're using a lot of external providers, or just there's so much use of it internally?
Simple devices that you use, medical devices, things that measure blood pressure. There can be AI tools in there that will affect how you make patient care decisions for the patient. And if it's trained on a patient population that's different than yours, Mount Sinai Health System's patient population is extremely diverse, but there can be impacts that are really inappropriate. There was an article just last week about how certain decisions of a really fundamental medical device impacted people of color differently because the way the tool was trained. It's something we have to be really mindful of and figure out how to get on top of and address. And we do have till March 1st, so I'm not that worried, no.
And Rob, financial services is another heavily regulated industry. How have you navigated through risks that you've identified?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I think we all think about constantly. And it's this constant balance of, there's this very cool, powerful technology out there right now that others are using. This is where it's like an arms race we're in today, right? Everybody's using it. We all have this fear of missing out or falling behind, and so everybody's running to go use it. And you got to balance that against some of these very real risks and challenges. And it's interesting, when ChatGPT first became well known, I was still in the semiconductor industry, and just down the road from my office, engineers at Samsung put their code out into the ChatGPT world, right? And it was exposed to everyone. And I used to say that's the best thing that ever happened to general counsels, because with respect to AI, is because now everybody comes to us and says, okay, we want to use this cool new thing, how are we going to do it to make sure that doesn't happen to us? I'm sort of now getting to the point where I think, like, okay, I'm on the other side of that curve, where there's so much fear that could happen to us that we tend to be now a little bit afraid of what could happen. We're not leaning out there as much as we can. To balance that, what we've done at Mastercard is we first off, we have our principles for the use of AI. Those principles that we put in place in sort of an ethereal context, right? These are our principles without any particular use case or situation in front of us, and we're going to stick to those principles, and we use those principles to guide us in all of our decisions. But then, in addition to that, we have sort of checks and balances throughout the organization. So we have an organization that's dedicated to thinking through AI use cases, that's dedicated to thinking through AI itself, that isn't necessarily responsible for coming up with the cases, but is responsible for vetting and helping us ensure that we do that really well.
So this is a kind of committee with multiple stakeholders?
Yes,
yes,
exactly right. And we have a chief AI and data officer who thinks about our data and how it's used and how data flows through AI. I mean, as we've seen already, and we talk about all the time, most of our AI problems, our AI challenges, are actually really data problems and data challenges. Data feeds the beast. What happens when that data gets out, or what happens if that data is used inappropriately, because these tools are so powerful and they can run. And so for us, it's about ensuring that we've got the right people thinking about the other side of all of these equations all the time, but that they're so thoughtful and careful about it from the perspective of, let's not let too much bureaucracy get in the way of good decisions on AI. And I think I start to feel these days, as I talk to some of my peers, that we're at risk actually of letting our own bureaucracies that we've created because we're afraid get in the way of making good decisions and good choices.
Well, let's see what the other panelists think about that. Do you agree, Shannon? Are we getting too risk averse when it comes to embracing AI innovation?
I would 100% agree with that. So we're structured very similar to how Mastercard's structured, believing that principles actually free people to experiment more than reams and reams of paper and rules. Mm-hmm. And I think what's important for us, if you start and say, how do I mitigate that risk I'm afraid of? The first is seek to understand. And so from top down, we have an AI training program. All of our people have to take it and complete it, and it's a series. So it's not just an hour and you check a box and you go on to the next year. It goes 6 hours of training this year. We'll probably continue it with different modules as AI evolves, as the risk evolves, as our use of AI evolves. We learn a lot. Some use cases turn out to be horrible ideas, not because of risk, but it actually just doesn't do what you want it to do. Some are great and it can be translated across to any number of different functions, but you have to first get your employees to understand, what's my AI code of conduct? What is the sandbox in which I can play? What is the kind of information we're comfortable right now experimenting with in AI? Where do we have external regulators we have to be extra sensitive to if we're going to use certain use cases like patient data, like clinical data? And what we've found is our employees are leaning in, and then we've got the governance around them. They can't do anything super crazy. And if the regulations change and we get a warning letter or we have risk, if we're doing it for the right reason and we've taken all the steps in advance, I can live with that because we're doing it to try to make an impact for patients.
So what is the general counsel's role here, Beth? Your companies, all three of you have companies doing a lot in AI, but I'm sure a lot of that involves other executives at the company. What's the GC's role at the table?
Well, there's a lot, but similar to what you both have described, we have a governance structure. It's multidisciplinary. We have several committees that feed up to an executive committee, and we report periodically to our board of trustees about AI. So I think the general counsel's first function is to make sure that there's a governance framework, multidisciplinary, in place, because as a lawyer, I don't really understand the AI that much. We do all the things that you described. We ensure that there's appropriate education and training. And that also goes to the lawyers in my office. You know, we need to make sure that our lawyers are current and understand the risks associated with these things, because it comes up in almost every area and almost everything that we do. We have collective bargaining agreements where the unions are concerned that AI is going to be reducing the need for workers. There are actually unions taking positions that they want to limit the use of AI by providers so that the role of their members aren't reduced. So every lawyer needs to be trained and understand what AI means and how it could impact things. I think that's the most important as a general counsel, what the role is, and to ensure that the executives are both comfortable enough to ensure that risks are taken. And we're a research institution also, like Moderna is. We have over 2,000 people in our school undertaking research. So we do it's really a lot of training, and that I think that's the most important thing.
Rob, what do you think are the most important relationships for you when it comes to understanding AI and keeping a handle on the risks?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things, and I think maybe first to answer the previous question just a little bit with one more thing that I think the general counsel needs to do, which is the general counsel needs to embrace AI.
Okay.
I think general counsel really does, including not only for the business and what the products and services the business sells, but within the legal organization as well. And we will talk about in a little bit more.
Yeah.
But I think it's really important that the company sees the legal organization adopting and using AI to try to make themselves better, because that's what we're trying to do within the company generally as an operating function, but also for all the products and services we sell. We're trying to use AI to make those things better. When business leaders across the organization see legal doing that, it's an unlock for them. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a big key for us. And so that bleeding then over into what relationships we need to have. For me, it's really important that, in any company that leans into technology or creates technology, the general counsel needs to have a close relationship with the chief technology officer or equivalent to really understand how the company thinks about technology creation, enablement, and deployment, right? That's really, really important. And I think that for me, that's always been sort of the most important area for a whole host of reasons. For me, as I think about it today, we're innovating in this space. We don't create AI, but we deploy it. And those deployment innovations are things that are valuable, and we want to make sure that we're protecting those, that Mastercard's inventions are protected. So there's that part of it. But then there's also ensuring that as our engineers go out and work and think about how they're going to develop AI deployment opportunities, that we have a system and process in place for ensuring we remain within our guardrails. And as I mentioned before, that I think those guardrails are really important, and they are because as long as the guardrails are well understood and the systems and processes are designed to channel within them, it gives people a lot of freedom to experiment. And it's that freedom to experiment that I think is really important and necessary within boundaries to ensuring that we use AI really well in the company. And the GC providing the space for that is a unique unlock, I think, that you can only get through the legal team.
We've touched on regulation, and of course we had the EU AI Act introduced earlier this year. I think there was something like 800 pieces of legislation introduced at the state level in the US last year. So it's a fast-changing picture. Shannon, is this a situation where the principles you have and your control of data arm you well to prepare for that changing legal landscape, or is there more to it than that?
Look, I think they arm us as well as we can be armed. And then we actually use AI to keep up with all the things that are changing from a regulatory and legal perspective on AI. So we have a GPT for that. And we have people on my team. And what's been amazing is to see how embracing AI unlocks the impact that some of your younger lawyers can have. It used to be when I came out of law school, nobody went in-house right away. They went to law firms, and that's where you got your training. And then as you developed relationships with clients or passion of industry, you went in-house. And what I'm finding is my younger lawyers are leading the way for us as a department in understanding it, and writing their own GPTs, and counseling and coaching all of us to both leverage it for ourselves, but they're now being asked to go around to the business and regulatory. How are you managing that in legal? Can you teach us? Can you write a GPT for us to do that? And the way that it's leaning in for the legal function to be engaged. Our CEO mentioned the legal function on a quarterly call earlier this year because we were ahead of the rest of the company, to your point about adopting AI. Think about how that feels when you go to work the next day and the legal department was the department that was called out. So to your point about regulations, I think you have to be comfortable taking risk. You have to have the sandbox, you have to have the principles, and you have to be ready to explain why perhaps what you're doing is slightly inconsistent with this brand new regulation. The stakeholder we haven't talked about, if you're going to do that, is you also have to have a good relationship with your board, and whatever committee really is going to lean in, just like everybody's nodding, cyber, right? How long did it take us to get our boards, in many cases audit committees, comfortable with how they should be monitoring cyber risk, how they should understand it, what can be prevented, what can't be prevented. Think about when was the last time you've had a conversation with your board about what's their governance and oversight responsibility, if any, in AI. We've started that not because it's a governance and oversight issue, but because what I learned during the cybersecurity evolution over the last decade is if you don't empower your board to be on the journey with you and learn as you're going, understand how AI is being employed, understand how you're using it, when you have that hiccup, when you have something come up, they're going to come from that overreaction place of, oh my God, this is horrible. If they're with you on the journey, they understand the risks that you're taking, and you have a much more educated stakeholder when you need them. And I think for all of us, that's going to be critically important in the years to come.
Very interesting. I don't want to monopolize these three, so please, if you have questions, raise your hand. We'll bring a microphone to you. We just ask that you give us your name and affiliation. But I've got one question I want to ask. Start thinking about the questions you want to ask the panelists in the meantime. Beth, you've had this journey to the multiple use cases that you have now, but a lot of other companies are not in that situation. They're still at the pilot stage. What advice would you offer them on moving forward?
I just think you have to be brave. There's no turning back, I want to say. It's really here to stay. It's really important. It's integrated in everything we do. And the more you learn about it, the more you're both worried and excited about the future. And it really is, Mount Sinai Health System, for those of you that don't know, our main campus is up on 98th Street. We're building an AI research building, a building that's going to be devoted to AI research on 103rd Street. So it is the future, and so as general counsels, we have to both use it in the legal department and help our clients, our company use it well, and it is very important. Also, I do agree about the board, and I think that's the most important role of the general counsel is my board has confidence that because we in the legal department are very involved with AI development, that they feel comfortable that the guardrails are in place that are appropriate. And I think that's a general counsel's role in everything we do. That's part of what makes our jobs, and I've been doing it a long time, is really exciting and important, is to get the confidence of the people on the board and our executives that they know that we can help them move forward. And the trick, which you so well put, is to do it in a way that doesn't deter innovation. I don't think I could deter innovation where I work. I think there's just an incredible hunger to move forward. We spun out a company that uses pathology reports and helps doctors easily detect, because of the AI data in the pathology slides, can much more easily and accurately evaluate slides. We have a company called Liabilities that's actually on the NASDAQ that can use artificial intelligence to predict whether a person with diabetes will end up with kidney failure. And it's incredibly effective. It has FDA approval. It's an AI-driven tool. It's a simple blood test, but what makes it amazing is it's an AI-driven tool. And it's just really exciting to be with people who see far beyond what I as a lawyer can see in the value that AI brings.
Rob, do you have any thoughts? Oh, we have a question here. If you could wait for the microphone, it's on the way. And so everybody can hear you.
It's a little bit of a sensitive question based on what you just said, but how do you assess the capability of your board to be on the journey with you and the need to maybe refresh the board to bring people with the expertise or mindset or curiosity to learn something that's so new?
Can I just say yes?
It's fully acceptable.
I think the answer to that is yes. I think if we had an Egon Zen or a Korn Ferry here looking at all of our boards, they would probably highlight that many of us are still behind the curve even on cyber expertise. And a lot of boards have said, well, I can bridge it if I have somebody who's technically competent and can sort of speak digital, therefore I have cyber. I think what we're seeing with AI being ubiquitous in all of our businesses, we're not going to have the luxury of traveling on the wink, wink, nod, nod. We've got the expertise. And so I do think it is going to be a board competency that within the next 5 years, the proxy advisors are going to be leaning in and they're going to say, Shannon, I am looking at your board, and who is it that really is that thought partner strategically for what you're doing operationally with management? And I think that's also going to be a combination, perhaps, if the regulations proliferate, on geopolitics. So we've got AI, and then we've got AI doesn't look like it's going to be implemented the same everywhere. And we talked a bit about it in the earlier panel, but Europe presents some challenges that may end up squelching innovation in the short term if they keep going down that path. And so you almost need someone who can translate your AI and understand what that's going to mean in the sectors where you work.
And in very practical terms, this means when you're having your conversations with your committees this year, whichever committee is thinking about the board or your board chair, that skills matrix becomes really, really important. That skills matrix discussion, as it was for cyber 4 or 5 years ago, when you started saying, as you're thinking about it with the board, what skills do we need to thrive as an organization? It was cyber, supply chain during COVID. Everybody started talking about supply chain, right? Now it is definitely conversance in AI. And I think increasingly for companies that are really leaned into it or need to be, it's the regulatory piece. Yep. How can we navigate a balkanized world, particularly when it comes to data protection, data localization? Those are things that are going to act and serve as challenges to full implementation of AI the way we would all like to, or in terms of the way we want to be able to do it. That balkanization, that ability to understand it, and to translate it, I think is going to become very important at the board level.
And I want to ask the same question, but internally, like skills, there's a big skills deficit here, isn't there? And I was talking to a chief compliance officer at a big tech company earlier this week who refreshed her entire department because she needed people with AI skills. Is that the same sort of decision making that you're going through?
For sure. So now we're on like my favorite topic of all time, which is what does the future of our teams look like? What does the future of our departments look like? What does AI do to that? For the legal organization, for sure, we are going to have to find people who are willing to learn how to use AI, who are going to be willing to alter their workflows to implement AI, who are going to learn how to prompt the tools, who are going to be able to understand that their job has changed a little bit now, and maybe instead of doing the first cut of analysis, they're asking a tool for, or a place, a being for some sort of analysis that they're going to vet and think about and use, but also creativity to say, what information do I wish I had today that if I had all the time and money in the world to go get, I could have it. I'll give a great example. If you're many of our lawyers are in commercial contract space. Maybe they help negotiate with a sales team or on the procurement side. And they go into those meetings and you're negotiating with a really tough customer who has a limitation of liability, requirement that's insane, right? And you're like, can we possibly agree to this insane no cap on an LOL, whatever it is, right? Today, we make those decisions based on sort of how the lawyer perceives it or feels about it, or maybe we have like a template and a playbook with a couple escalations. But we don't really make those decisions often in context of what we've done as a company and what our sort of total risk profile is. Imagine instead a lawyer being able to go into that meeting and can say, well, here's the largest limitation of liability we've ever given as opposed to or in context of the business opportunity that was in front of us. Or here's the biggest LOL we've ever given, the worst LOL we've ever given in the context of what we sold over the next 5 years. Let's put this deal in context with that. It's hard to do that today, even if you have a really great CLM system. But if you've deployed AI across your legal team, it's information you get in seconds. So we're going to need lawyers who want to have that information, who understand how to get it, and who can help us design systems in our organizations to get it. So I think it's going to be a major change.
Shannon, you have talked about the importance of changing the culture and having a culture of AI. How do you, but you're also with a company that grew up with AI, so for a company that didn't grow up with AI, do you have any suggestions about how to establish that kind of culture?
Absolutely. I think first, to quote Nike, just do it. But it has to start with the top. I think your C-suite has to be aligned in how they think about AI, and that you're all leaning in, if that's the case, together and at the same time. Because the worst thing that can happen around that table is if some functions are leaning in and some functions are leaning back, and then that creates a lot of issues because very rarely do corporate processes work in a vacuum. You have end-to-end processes to get drug to patients, for example. You've all got to be leaning in. I think the second thing is really spend time explaining what it is, what your process and your guardrails are, and then let people experiment. About a year ago, when we did the collaboration with OpenAI, I had a leadership team offsite, and 100% of my leadership team was like, it's not relevant for us. We can't use it. Look, there was a lawsuit in Virginia, and it hallucinated 22 of 24 cases. We're lawyers. It has no place in our business. And I dedicated 2 hours and just had them start to use it. I had brought in some of our young lawyers who were already using it. And by the end of that meeting, they were all blown away because they had the chance to work with it, to experiment, to understand its upsides, to better understand where there might be downside potential, but to realize that just like this device, some of us graduated from law school when this didn't exist. We got the BlackBerries and we thought, this is great, we can do work from everywhere, and now we realize that was a really bad thing to be excited about in the mid-90s. AI is going to be the same thing. None of us will do what we do without being AI enabled in some way, shape, or form. I've got my Moderna enterprise instance of GPT on my phone. I use it every day when I get a question, when someone wants me to digest a contract, when we have significant commercial relations. We've already created the GPTs, so it's super easy for me to figure out what the issues are, to your point, crawling across. Everybody's going to lean in like that. So if companies haven't started yet, start with making it less scary. Explain it, explain the why, and let people experiment with it. And I trust me, it will change hearts and minds.
I want to come back to something that we've covered a little bit, which is the governance process around this. And Beth, I know you have an interesting model here where you have an overall committee, I think,
Yes.
and some subcommittees.
And we're an academic institution, so everybody wants to be on committees all the time, which is different from other businesses.
So talk us through the process of perhaps a new project involving AI and how it gets reviewed and who's involved.
So it really would depend, and just like Shannon talked about, we're highly regulated and we do a lot of AI work that involves human subjects. So I'll just mention for a moment the kind of regulation that we have with the Institutional Review Board, which really, they've just grown and developed expertise in the AI area. And all human subject review gets through this panel with an expert that looks at making sure that patient confidentiality is taken into account, that the risks are appropriate given the potential benefits, and that the consent of the patient is taken care of. On the corporate side, I think we have this organizational structure with the IT department, where our senior data people are incredibly sophisticated and thoughtful, work together with legal and the proponents of the projects, bring it through several layers of committee, and ultimately it goes to an executive AI committee that approves these things. And if it's something that we determine is really material, it goes to our board. Our board has over 80 people. It's a different kind of board than what you're used to. And we do have AI experts and actually, proponents on the board, and that can be also very helpful. So I think we are really moving very quickly, and we use AI in almost everything we do. And part of what that means is that we don't review everything in that sort of way, but have guardrails and rules and understand when questions arise and where things have to happen. because if AI is everywhere, you can't have committee meetings about them.
Yeah, and so Rob, how do you balance that need to move rapidly with running it through a governance process?
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a challenge. AI, when it's new, it's a thing where we have to decide how we're going to tackle it and deal with it and what the procedures are. I think the big key is establish durable systems and processes for how to do this. If you're reinventing your process every single time you come up with a new idea, those ideas will never go anywhere. But if you have a system and process and an ethos at the company for how we're going to do this and how we're going to move through it, then I think you can tackle these things in real time. But it's well stated. If every time you have something new, you have to run it through some new committee or create a committee to deal with it, you're hosed, right? It's just you're never going to get anywhere.
If a problem arises, Shannon, how does that feed back through the governance process?
Yeah, so we've got an AI committee, as you do. We're a little lighter on governance as a startup, so I think we probably lean a bit more into risk and can. We have 2 products on the market and we're building, so there's a lot we're doing in incubation stage right now. So when we fail internally. We don't fail externally in a way that creates legal risk for us. But when we see those problems, it comes up to our AI committee. I've got several lawyers who are far more fluent in all things AI than I am, and basically they just sit with the business and have the conversation. What went wrong? What do we need to fix? Do we have our privacy people in? Do we have privacy notifications? Sometimes we trip across this with patient data. But right now for us, we are at a size and a stage in our organization where it becomes just daily conversations. There's not a org chart, there's not a document, there's just someone will pop by the office and say, hey, this happened, what do you think? Do we have anything to do? We resolve it and we move on. And what I love about being at a place like Moderna as a startup is we just fail fast. We take the learnings from it because it's very much a learning culture. And then we move on to continue to innovate. Those failures don't prevent people from tomorrow coming up with the next big idea. And I think for us, we want to make sure governance doesn't start to choke out, where you start to have that fear of failure internally, and people stop experimenting. Because right now, if you stop experimenting, you really have lost your innovative advantage.
Just coming back to regulations for a moment, is there a case for engaging with regulators? I was interviewing a general counsel earlier in the year who put a lot of emphasis on that. Rob, I see you nodding.
Well, for sure, and I'll leave it to others maybe to talk about their specific regulatory needs, but maybe I'll just start by saying you are seeing regulations pop up all over the world and all over the country. Different states are enacting their own regulations as well, and I think that's all very interesting. AI is not a monolith, right? It is not just one big thing. AI is a whole bunch of different deployments of ideas and technology and opportunity. And where I'm really focused right now is running those use cases through regulators and helping them really understand the benevolent, easy use cases and be able to decipher what those look like and to contrast them against the scary use cases that they need to spend their time really thinking about how to regulate. And maybe that's a little bit self-serving because I'm going to say that all of Mastercard's AI use cases are benevolent white knight use cases. We're trying to keep the world safe. But the reality is, deploying AI to keep a payment network safe and to look at transactions and look for patterns and things like that is very different from other types of AI use cases that could, that take the world down in some way. What's it called? What's your reality distortion? Those two things are really different. And so the way that those things are regulated should be different. Running use cases completely through data localization issues, data rules and regulations, AI regulation, to me that is a really great opportunity, and we have to go engage with the regulators now and help them understand. They think a lot about the big scary parade of horribles type things, and we got to regulate for that. But what we really need them to do is create space for good AI use cases so that we can innovate in those places without having to deal with overly restrictive regulation.
Beth, have you engaged with regulators? You find
I engage with regulators all day, every day. I I know appropriate regulation is necessary. I have little hope that it will happen quickly or be appropriate at first. It's going to be a process.
And probably a learning process for them as well.
Yes, but I think it's
Especially
going to
on
be
these cases.
extremely challenging.
But I think bringing those two things together, what's really important is to remember what an opportunity it is to be on the forefront of educating regulators, both about AI in general and about how AI is going to apply in your business and in your industry. And I think sometimes we take for granted that the regulators must know what they're doing.
They don't know anything.
They're regulators, they
No,
don't, we know this. But so often as companies, we've been waiting, let's just wait till we see the draft regulation and then we'll go in. Let's wait till we have something on paper because we don't want to bid against ourselves. And one of the things I'm a big believer in is I would go in before there's a draft. We've been having conversations with FDA, having conversations with other regulators to say, as you're thinking about this, let's talk about the good of AI. Let's talk about the things we're worried about. Tell us what you're worried about so we can have a conversation and frankly come to a common language. Because what I still see is maybe Mastercard, certainly at Moderna, we're having conversations with the regulators and we're not actually even on the same page with what are we talking about, what's the impact, what's the technology, what are the controls, and I am hopeful that early and often engagement and being part of their process will ultimately end up in better regulations.
And we are about out of time for this formal session, but please stay with us. We're going to have cocktails down on the floor below. Our speakers will be joining us. Maybe you have a question you want to ask them one-to-one. Thank you all for joining us. And please join me in thanking also Beth, Rob, and Shannon.